This is a recorded version of the presentation delivered at the Tyndale Fellowship Annual Conference in Derbyshire on July 2nd, 2025, as part of the Philosophy of Religion study group. What follows is a faithful representation of the core argument as presented live, adapted slightly for this recorded format. So let's begin. Good morning, colleagues. Permit me to start, as I often do, with a biblical text that quietly frames the argument. Revelation 21 declares, "Behold, I make all things new." All things new. Well, the question before us is no longer whether technology is transforming the world. That is already self-evident. The more pressing inquiry is whether these new towers of human construction will stand as altars of covenantal vocation or as monuments to autonomy. We gather as scholars in a moment where neural networks, biometric surveillance, autonomous weapon systems, and generative language models now construct architectures of power and identity once confined to theological imagination. The echoes of Babel no longer rise in brick and bitumen, they rise in code. For a bit of quick housekeeping, I will not be reciting my 36-page academic manuscript, and instead I will offer hard copies to the live presentation, and digital copies are available on my website. What follows then is not a full reading of the academic paper, but a guided exposition of the central thesis. My argument is simple in structure, but demanding in implication. Artificial intelligence and transhumanism confront us with the renewed crisis of the Imago Dei. The ancient idolatry of Babel has not disappeared. It is simply adapted to the logic of the algorithm. This paper explores how covenantal theology, philosophical anthropology, and eschatological hope must be recovered to meet the metaphysical ruptures now emerging at the intersections of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and human personhood. I also intend to merge philosophical pontification and practical application with theological inquiry, minding the gap, since we're in the UK, so to speak, with theological inquiry. That's why we begin here. I'm showing you this because it's real life. It's not fantasy or theory. What once we thought of as science fiction is now science fact. And this is why we have to take it seriously as religious philosophers. Whether you like the guy or not, Elon Musk is one of the brightest minds in artificial intelligence and many other things. So what he has to say about it matters. What has he had to say about it over the past couple of years? Let's see.
I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know all those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, he's sure he can control the demon. Doesn't work out.
In the second video, he predicts humanity's future.
The merge scenario with AI is the one that seems like probably the best. Like
for us.
Yes. Like if you can't beat it, join it.
The merge scenario is the transhumanist reality. It's where biological humans are merged with artificial intelligence. If we believe him, and if we are to take this seriously, as scholars and just as human beings together, our understanding should be that AI and transhumanism brings us here. We no longer need to wait for God. We can upgrade ourselves. We no longer need revelation. We have predicted algorithms. We no longer need resurrection. We can replicate ourselves. This is why we are at philosophical and theological reflection on this matter. French philosopher Jacques Ellul foresaw this not as technological optimism, but as technological compulsion. In his book, The Technological Society, he observes that once a new technique becomes theoretically possible, its development proceeds, not because of moral desirability, but because it is technically necessary. Military competition, economic advantage, national security imperatives, these collectively remove the space for ethical deliberation. There is no sustained pause for theological reflection between conceptual breakthrough and operational deployment. The movement from theory to implementation becomes automatic. As Ellul warned, what characterizes technique is its automatism. Once a technical fact is admitted, it will be developed. To quote maybe an even more famous philosopher from Jurassic Park, Played by Jeff Goldblum, the character says, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could or not, they did not stop to ask if they should." The result is a momentum in which technology no longer waits for questions of whether it should exist, but it accelerates only through the mechanics of how it can exist. Martin Heidegger similarly diagnoses in his category of Gestell and framing. The world becomes Bestand, standing reserve, where persons are apprehended as data streams, bodies quantified into risk models. Human futures are calculated as probabilities, not as covenantal narratives. Aristotle, centuries earlier, diagnosed the underlying disorder, megalopsychia, greatness without telos, severed from its proper end. Human greatness, stripped from divine orientation, collapses into distorted self-exaltation. And Babel rises again, but it speaks Python, not Akkadian. Against this emerging technological ontology, Christian anthropology centers on the Imago Dei, not as biological property, but as covenantal vocation. Genesis 1, Silem and Demut, ground humanity not in ontological supremacy, but in relational responsibility. To bear God's image is to participate in God's rule through stewardship, not domination. The Silem echoes ancient Near Eastern kingship, where effigies carry delegated authority. Yet, unlike Mesopotamian Solmu statues, humanity's image-bearing is animated, breathed upon, and embedded with relational communion. J. Richard Middleton reminds us, Silem commissions humanity for covenantal representation, while Victor Hamilton frames dominion not as coercive sovereignty, but as delegated stewardship over creation's flourishing. In the New Testament, Paul's icon reframes this dignity in Christological terms. Colossians 1:15 declares Christ as the icon of the invisible God, the definitive restoration of fractured image-bearing. Romans 8:29 declares that those people are conformed into the icon of his Son, not by technological ascent, but by cruciform transformation. The Christian vision is neither disembodied consciousness nor algorithm eternity. It is resurrection, not data transfer, but transfiguration. The deepest theological rupture in these systems emerges not in their technical capacity, but in their idolatrous logic. Here, transhumanism reveals its character as eidolon, the false image. Where Silem and icon establish humanity as relationally derivative, eidolon fabricates image divorced from its referent. It offers transcendence without creator, immortality without resurrection, autonomy without covenant. Nick Bostrom's work on superintelligence envisions a horizon where machine cognition indefinitely exceeds human capacity. Yet this projection ultimately recasts human hope into a soteriology of optimization severed from divine grace. Jean-Luc Marion reminds us, the idol domesticates mystery, enclosing transcendence within human control. Emmanuel Levinas counters with ethical responsibility. The face of the other demands encounter, not reduction. Yet, the most recent developments intensify these ruptures. In a June 2025 interview on The Sean Ryan Show, Alexander Wang, CEO of Scale AI, a company supplying training data directly to OpenAI, Microsoft, and the United States Department of Defense, publicly described his hope of embedding neural interface technology in infants and children during the earliest stages of neuroplastic development.
I want to wait to have kids until we figure out how Neuralink or other, it's called brain-computer interfaces, so other ways for brains to interlink with a computer until they start working. I think when we get Neuralink and we get these other technologies, kids who are born with them are going to learn how to use them in like crazy ways. Like it'll be actually like a part of their brain.
Even in academia, it's really hard to separate my mom role from understanding this. What he's proposing is implanting brain-computer interface at birth so the child always has optimized access to AI and the internet. In his own words, this would allow children to integrate artificial intelligence directly into cognition in ways that adults would never fully master. I think about this the same way I think about vaccine mandates in hospitals for newborns today, or COVID vaccination as a social pressure type of force. What would it be like as a parent in the future if you would not allow this to happen to your newborn or infant? if you would not allow a brain-computer interface? What kind of social political pressure could be applied? And not just that, how far behind would your child be if you refused? These are real questions, and the answers are very complicated. See, what Alex is proposing is not simply brain augmentation. This is the direct fusion of biological life with computational architecture. Wang describes a horizon where AI access allows for the following 5 things. Number 1, projected artificial realities fully manufactured within the brain sensory pathways. Number 2, the rewriting of visual processing data at the cortical level, and that has already been demonstrated experimentally in non-human primates. Number 3, the implantation or erasure of memory, affect, or volition. Number 4, the manipulation of fear, pleasure, motivation, or decision-making itself. And number 5, perhaps the most chilling, the exposure of human cognition to adversarial state actors, foreign intelligence agencies, or corporate manipulation, not through propaganda, but through real-time neural intrusion. In this model, the self becomes both user and substrate. The brain becomes a writable file system. Memory is not recalled, it's recoded. Emotion is not processed, it is engineered. The very architecture of personhood collapses into programmable infrastructure. This is beyond science fiction. Neuralink's 2025 clinical trials authorized by the US FDA have already begun invasive neurological testing. DARPA's super soldier neuro-augmentation programs are actively integrating neural interfaces into military applications, as are UAE national defense initiatives. The programs seek not only to repair, but to redesign human vulnerability itself. We're not talking about algorithms anymore. We're discussing the seizure of ontological agency. This is the most radical expression of the eidolon, an idol not sculpted in stone, but installed in neural firmware. Still, the idolatry extends beyond personal into the societal, as AI systems increasingly function as synthetic priesthoods, mediating governance, healthcare, and justice. In the United Kingdom, Palantir's NHS Federated Data Platform now integrates millions of patient records into predictive healthcare models. The result is not only diagnostic efficiency, but a kind of algorithmic liturgy, where suffering and mortality are managed as risk profiles and actuarial forecasts rather than discerned through embodied clinical judgment and relational care. Saudi Arabia's NEOM, a state-sponsored AI-integrated megacity that merges surveillance infrastructure with biomedical research, is now experimenting with algorithmic life extension, treating mortality itself as a problem for data optimization rather than theological reflection. In China, Skynet's 626 million surveillance cameras form the most extensive facial recognition governance apparatus in human history, extending even into predictive behavioral modeling. Aadhaar India, their billion-person biometric database, simply encodes identity into administrative calculus rather than covenantal naming. And in the United States, Palantir's expanding defense contracts now merge AI analytics into predictive warfare platforms, kill chain automation, and autonomous battlefield targeting, integrating not only real-time surveillance, but anticipatory force projection at preemptive strike speeds. That sounds a bit like Minority Report to me. Have you seen that movie? Except this is real. And the ethical risk is clear. These systems do not simply observe reality, they preemptively shape it. They don't just simply process identity, they actively administrate it. The person becomes administratively pre-classified before encountering moral community. The temptation facing much of our technological discourse is to assume that the solution lies in regulation and better technical guardrails or in pragmatic governance models. But while these are necessary, they're insufficient. The problem before us is not only ethical, it's theological. At its heart, the crisis of artificial intelligence and transhumanism is a crisis of misplaced authority. The central claim of covenant theology is that humanity does not own its existence. We are not creators of being, we are recipients of it. Isaiah warns, their land is filled with Elohim, hollow images, Isaiah 2:8. But this hollowing is not merely visual idolatry, it's ontological usurpation. It is, as Genesis frames Babel, the impulse to make a name for ourselves. The covenant offers a countervailing vision. Bonhoeffer reminds us that personhood is not self-generated but received through participation in the body of Christ. Human community is not aggregative but sacramental. We do not become fully human in isolation or optimization, but only in communion, in relationship. Hans-Georg Gadamer, his philosophical hermeneutics further deepened this point. Truth emerges not from predictive certainty, but from dialogic encounter. The world is not raw information to be mined, but relational meaning to be discerned. Aquinas frames this as sapientia, wisdom ordered toward divine purpose, not technological mastery. Knowledge ordered toward self-exaltation is not wisdom, it's deformation. This covenantal wisdom directly opposes the technological liturgies we now witness. The question at stake is not whether these systems function, it's whether they preserve personhood or dissolve it into synthetic liturgies. The covenantal alternative insists that identity remains bound to God's call, not algorithmic predictions. Standing at the outer edge of technological ambition lies a vision of immortality that seeks to surpass boundaries of finitude itself. Here, transhumanism offers its most radical proposal, that death may be conquered not by grace but by engineering. Yet, Christianity has already spoken on this matter. Philippians 3 declares our citizenship is in heaven, from which we await a Savior who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body. Resurrection is not consciousness transfer. It is not data preservation. It is not silicone eternity. It is the ontological renewal of embodied life by divine agency. Jürgen Moltmann names this rightly. Hope binds creation not to technical mastery, but to God's promised future. It is against this hope transhumanist projects emerge as distorted analogs. They offer a form of resurrection without the substance of redemption. Neuralink's 2025 clinical trials envision brain-computer fusion as a form of continuity. Polygenic trait selection, now employed in IVF embryo screening, selects for intelligence, disease resistance, and projected attributes. Artificial wombs, already prototyped, remove even gestation from embodied covenantal formation. These are not isolated experiments. They are a coherent part of growing technological eschatology. Martin Buber's I-Thou framework clarifies a deeper rift. For Buber, personhood is not achieved through autonomy, but through relational encounter. AI, however sophisticated, structures its relationship as I-it, reducing the other into a usable resource. Still further, the capacity of these systems to simulate sacramental space is emerging. AI-generated Jesus avatars now function as conventional partners in some Catholic applications. AI-generated homilies are already being deployed experimentally in Anglican churches. These technologies attempt to mimic sacred presence while severing sacrament from incarnation. Philosophically, such systems do not merely extend life or simulate ministry, they reconfigure what it means to be human. Resurrection is no longer anticipated as divine action, but reimagined through technological achievement. The Christian claim resists this entirely. Personhood is not programmable. Eternity is not uploadable. If transhumanism distorts personhood and algorithmic priesthoods displace sacrament, then the Church's ethical response must be framed not by technocratic optimism, but by covenantal discernment. Here, Bonhoeffer's formulation is decisive. Ethics is always responsibility for the other. The ethical task of AI governance is not to maximize efficiency, but to preserve dignity of personhood within communities ordered toward justice and love. Paul Ricoeur likewise offers a necessary corrective through his narrative ethics. The person is not a discrete computational entity. The self unfolds through time, community, memory, and covenantal story. AI systems, however, risk fracturing these negatives into isolated data points. Globally, we are already witnessing AI's capacity to serve and distort communal life. In 2025, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees expanded the deployment of AI-driven resettlement algorithms. These systems optimize refugee placements across host nations by balancing resource capacity, security concerns, and social compatibility scores. While efficient, such models risk reducing vulnerable persons into calculable units, logistical burdens to be data distributed rather than sacred persons to be received. Predictive policing models deployed in both the United States and increasingly trialed in European cities extend this risk even further. Since we are in the UK, here's an article in Parliament. This was written in 2021 on predictive policing trial throughout the country. Trained on historical crime data, these models allocate law enforcement resources preemptively, embedding within their algorithms the structural inequities of prior policing practices. The result is not ethical neutrality, but the reinforcement of systemic injustice beneath a veneer of computational objectivity. These technologies do not simply collect data about persons, they actively prescript communal futures. The philosophical and theological question is therefore not whether AI can manage these tasks, but whether such management preserves the covenantal depth of human community or replaces it with administrative sovereignty. Covenantal discernment insists that governance must always remain relational. The other is not a data object, but an image bearer. The theological reckoning before us is not confined to research or debate rooms. It is shaping the very architecture of ecclesial formation. Artificial intelligence is not a distant abstraction circling academic discourse. It is already sculpting liturgies, pastoral care, governance, and sacramental encounter. The crisis before us presses directly into the vocation of theological education. Aquinas, with his precision, reminds us that knowledge divorced from wisdom degenerates into manipulation. Wisdom governs not what can be known, but what ought to be known, and how that knowledge serves love of God and neighbor. This is where much of current religious and biblical education stands exposed. The Academy debates AI's role in regulating plagiarism software or optimizing administrative workflows, while the deeper metaphysical tremors remain largely untouched. The issue is not digital convenience, it is covenantal identity. The next generation of pastors, apologists, ethicists, theologians, and religious philosophers will administer within algorithmic systems that actively shape identity, memory, and moral formation long before human shepherds ever enter the room. Their task will not to be to accommodate these structures passively, but to interrogate whether such technologies serve communion or fracture it. Are we equipping them properly in our schools of divinity and seminaries right now? There are some encouraging models beginning to emerge, one in India and another in Canada, where students are not simply trained to comment on AI, they are equipped to navigate its penetration into anthropology, ecclesiology, and sacramental practice. Instead of the work being cosmetic, it's ontological, and that's where we all need to move. The vocation before us is not to engineer more sophisticated systems. The vocation is to raise stewards, those who can enter algorithmic spaces without surrendering covenantal responsibility. Artificial intelligence will not pause for us to deliberate. It advances at its own velocity, Ellul's law technique. The question is whether those entrusted with the theological formation will stand ready to form the next generation of religious leaders and philosophers, because it's their wisdom that will anchor communities within God's redemptive story. Across these technological architectures, whether constructed in silicon or summoned in code, the ancient question persists. Will humanity reflect the Imago Dei, or will it bow before newly forged algorithmic altars? The project we have traversed has followed this question through Babel's consolidation, through the eidolon of transhumanist ambition, and through the sacramental distortions of artificial intelligence governance, and through the educational thresholds now placed before us. At every stage, the crisis remains ontological. The most pressing danger is not that artificial intelligence will become conscious, but that the church will forget what it means to be human. Resurrection stands as the singular horizon AI cannot replicate. Philippians 3 does not offer technological continuity, but divine transfiguration. The new creation is not engineered, it is bestowed. As Bonhoeffer warns, might severed from Christ's kenosis fractures humanity. As Moltmann anchors, hope binds creation not to technological ambition, but to God's promised future. As Aquinas orders, wisdom is not the mastery of knowledge, but its submission to divine love. The role of the philosophy of religion and of every institution represented in this room is not to yield the conversation to technological determinism, but to summon the church towards covenantal fidelity. Artificial intelligence will not be stopped by anxiety or nostalgia. Its advance is already woven into the structures of governance, medicine, defense, and worship. What remains fully within our stewardship is whether these systems will serve communion or fracture it, whether they will become instruments of covenantal justice or the scaffolding of new towers reaching towards self-made heavens. And that, friends, is where our task now rests. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great day.